You've got to realize you are an expert in what you make, but you may not necessarily be an expert in putting together an experience. And there is, in a lot of ways, more art to it than science. And that's something you also have to make sure you're okay with.
Yeah.
A great pathway to that is making sure that your team members that are involved are living in an environment where experimentation is okay.
Yeah.
So many of us are risk adverse.
Yep.
And when you're creating something that is experiential, you have to be willing to accept the risk that comes with it.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily always financial risk. Sometimes that risk can be time. But if you're going to make an experience that people are going to love and engage, sometimes the way you come across the thing that's going to work is by figuring out all of the things that aren't going to work.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the Marketing Blender. I am Dacia Coffey, and today I have a special co-host, Ryan Heath, who is our brilliant project manager and has hidden secret powers that I'm super excited to share with everybody because Ryan's got a fascinating background and he is a true showman. And that's why today's topic is what role should experiential marketing play in the business-to-business world? So Ryan, welcome to the podcast. I know this will be the first of many, but I have been looking so forward to this.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Yes, totally. Okay, so we're going to have to define experiential marketing first. So let's start there, and then I want to get into your background. So I'm going to do this a little backwards than normally when I have a co-host. So what the heck is experiential marketing?
Thinking about something that's immersive, that is engaging, a place where people can interact with a product, with a concept, with an idea on more than just a superficial level.
Yeah. So is it always in the real world?
That's a great question. For a long time, it was.
Yeah.
If we go back 4 or 5 decades, you had billboards, you had print, and you had experiences. And as the digital world has evolved, the concept of experiential marketing, it's a lot to say sometimes. The idea of experiential marketing has evolved as well. But as I think about it, leaning back into the in-person type of experiential concepts,
yeah,
I think it's a lot of value.
I totally agree. Some of my favorite deployments, because we're especially in B2B, for instance, are road shows or taking the opportunity at a trade show and being like, what if we created some experience when they walked up to our little 10 by 10 booth so good that they went home and told their wife or their kids or their best friend or their peers when they got back to the office, that really actually created something that, really provoked an emotion or a memory for them. And so I so agree with you that we should not be leaving that physical experience component on the table, even though digital is accelerating and even though there might be different aspects. So completely agree. So before we keep plowing forward into experiential marketing, I want to pause now and be like, all right, let's talk a little bit about your background so that everybody knows why I invited you specifically on this and why you do get involved with our client work on the experience side. So tell everybody a little bit about, your background before you're in the marketing world.
Sure. So I do have a little bit of experience putting events on. I spent 16 years as a band director, a high school band director here in Texas, and living in the world of experience and pageantry, everything from small local parades and halftime shows to the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. And I was even involved in the Super Bowl halftime show at one point. Yeah. And so when we talk about experiences, as a musician, that's literally what you're creating on a day-to-day basis, is an experience for somebody else that has intellectual and emotional connection.
Yeah. Okay. So I love that. And so thinking about that, those both, the duality, the intellectual and the emotional, like what are some of the ways or the planning, like what are some of the thinking processes that you engage in when you're thinking, okay, I want to make that connection with an audience?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in the pageantry world, there's a term we use called general effect.
Okay.
And it's the concept of bringing all of the different elements together and how do they affect the audience? Or in this case, we're talking about marketing, how do they affect our customers? How do they affect our target market?
Yeah.
And so that can be split up into two, intellectual effect and emotional effect. And it's pretty simple. Intellectual effect is, how does something make you think? Not just on a superficial level, but on a real deep engagement level.
Yeah.
And then emotional effect is not the emotion after the fact, but the instant, immediate emotional reaction. How does something make you feel but react?
Yeah. Okay. So the few times, like, I can recall some, distant experiences where I asked a client, how do you want the market to feel? And they would go, I want them to trust us. And I thought, that is a terrible answer. Like, because trust as an emotion is not actually an emotion. So can you give some experiences where you chose an emotion and were like, I'm going to provoke this? And, like, just to help people understand, like, the intentionality behind that. Because it's not, I just want them to feel something.
Right.
Like, I'm assuming you are like, no, I want them to feel a very specific thing, and we are going to choreograph to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great point you bring up, because if you don't have a thought and a plan ahead of time of the emotion or the thought that you want your client to experience, you're going to be grasping at straws the entire time. And I know we're going to talk a little more about planning later on. I'll give you an example of one actually that we're working on right now. We've got a great client of ours that has a giant event coming up, and I know it's so exciting. And we're featuring one of their new key products, and what we've decided to do with that is to create a wow moment with it. And I don't want to give too much away, because this is going to be such a cool thing later on. But basically, we're taking something that on its own could be really bland, although it's a cool product.
100% super bland.
For sure.
Yep.
And we're creating a really immersive experience that's going to hit all of your senses, and the participants are going to get to experience this product as if it were out in the real world.
Yeah.
But it's in a static environment. It's sound, it's lights, it's even some smoke machines. We talk about smoke and mirrors, and that sometimes is used, not in a great way, but it came from a place where you're creating an experience. So we've taken something that is real static and we've made it dynamic.
I love this example so much, because this is an engineered product. Mm-hmm. And so traditionally, they would have pictures of the installations.
Right.
They would have their engineering specifications. They would have the use cases. It can be used here. Even if they had a product display, it's very, and then each participant has to read or think mm-hmm. or find their own questions. And instead, what you and Crystal have designed is people will walk in and they're going to get it like that.
Yeah, we're putting them in the environment.
Yes. And then it will pique their curiosity to be like, wait. And so what I love is their emotions are going to lead them into that intellectual connection. So typically it would lead with, we need you to know these facts. And instead, like, their feeling and their aha and the wow, which is the emotion you want them to have, is going to lead their curiosity to, like, how could I use this? Like, oh my gosh, I get it, and like immediately start applying it to their real world. And it's so cool. They're going to go home and be like, you're not going to believe what this company did. It was so neat.
Yeah, that's what we hope, is that people are going to tell a story. And what's great is you can do this with just about anything.
Okay.
A wonderful example, and I always go back to this because they're the best at basically everything they do. If you've ever been to Disney World or Disneyland, long time ago, you would get in line, you would go ride the ride, and the ride was great, and you would forget about the line. But they've turned all of their lines into experiences.
Yes.
And the way that they go about that is a wonderful model for how you can take just about anything that you want your clients to engage with and create that emotional and intellectual attachment.
Are you a CEO of a business-to-business company? Maybe you're a sales leader or a salesperson, or maybe you're in business-to-business marketing. Well, if so, I wrote a book for you, and it's called Corporate Caffeine. Business-to-business marketing is different, but there are certain predictable, fundamental principles that will help you unleash your organizational potential and fill your pipeline sustainably. So you can find my book on Audible, on Amazon, on barnesandnoble.com, or any of your favorite retailers. Hope you enjoy it, and I'd love to hear your feedback. Okay, so I'm going to totally nerd out for a second. Like in manufacturing, there's a principle in lean manufacturing about cutting waste or using waste and creating value out of the wasted product. And there are similar principles in software as well. And this is what I love. Like that Disney example is such a great idea because the line is a wasted experience for the client unless it's not. And even B2B companies have so many things like that where don't let touches be a wasted experience. Like, and it doesn't, we're giving an extreme example to start getting people thinking experience, and a point of view, but there could be little winks, little clever things that you do that are micro experiences that cut waste from a buying process. And that's what I love so much is that there's so many applications. Like, yeah, let's go find the big bang things, but then let's take that thinking and apply it into like a customer experience or a prospect experience. And that's where I'm like, oh my gosh, this is where it's so good because you've got to market anyways. Why not be amazing? Right?
Right.
So, okay. So let's talk about like when you're, where do you start? It's so easy to see an amazing roadshow or this big vision of a client experience or, a trade show or, a plant tour or a demo, like even if it's an online demo. And to think, oh, I wish it was like this. But how do you begin the process of determining what emotion, what intellectual reframe, what things do you deploy? What are all the ways or when should you do this? So tell me a little bit about the planning.
Yeah. What's so interesting about that is you do have to. This seems like it's a simple thing, but you have to start with the thing, right?
Yeah.
You have to decide what is the thing that we want our clients to walk away with, and that could be a product. It could be an idea.
Yeah.
A great example, and they're not selling a product, but TED Talks, okay, are a perfect example of intellectual engagement.
Yeah.
And that has become its own industry in so many ways and has inspired so many split-offs and but their simple concept was ideas worth sharing.
Exactly.
And on the emotional side, I'm going to use these as two examples and then get to your question. Like on an emotional side, my wife loves Tom's shoes, and
Yes.
they created a campaign several years ago called One Day Without Shoes. And they were encouraging all of their customers to simply do that, to spend an entire day going through your normal life barefoot.
Yeah.
To give people a feel of what children who don't have good pairs of shoes are going through. That had nothing to, and they were never saying, hey, do this and then go buy our stuff, but they were creating a real emotional connection to their product and a lasting emotional connection there.
Yeah.
And it's just a couple of examples, but you have to have a idea.
Yeah.
Right. From there, you've got to realize you are an expert in what you make, but you may not necessarily be an expert in putting together an experience.
Yeah.
And so there's a couple things. One, if you're not, go find someone that is.
So true.
Because it is totally its own thing.
It really is. Exactly. We deploy that with very different teams. So you're right. It's its own art and science.
It really is. And there is, in a lot of ways, more art to it than science. And that's something you also have to make sure you're okay with.
Yeah.
A great pathway to that is making sure that your team members that are involved are living in an environment where experimentation is okay.
Yeah.
So many of us are risk adverse.
Yep.
And when you're creating something that is experiential, you have to be willing to accept the risk that comes with it.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily always financial risk. Sometimes that risk can be time. But if you're going to make an experience that people are going to love and engage, sometimes the way you come across the thing that's going to work is by figuring out all of the things that aren't going to work.
So true. And back to the waste component. So, when I think about risk, it's because humans are complex. They are often surprising, no matter what people say. And when you're talking about an experience, sometimes people's experiences or response of that emotion, even if you nailed it, can be surprising. you've got to decide that you're on a journey with that,
Right.
with that market, and being like, okay, whatever people are bringing to the table and their response, we're going to be along with it. And one of the things that's not always appropriate, but it is often appropriate, is get it all on camera. Like, those are ways.
Document it.
Exactly. And then you can tell the stories. And sometimes, so it's not a one and done, because a lot of times these events are one and done. But then if you tell the story so well, and you bring it into YouTube or you bring it into your social media, people can, have the same response watching people's responses. Their experientials are so remarkable. And a lot of times it's one to few, right? So the old one where women describe themselves and they had a sketch artist, and then they had a stranger describe them and the sketch artist did a different version. You saw.
It was so cool.
Oh my God. I have seen that thing so many times and I cry. And I'm not even one of the women. I cry every single time I watch this, and they've got so many others. Weight Watcher had done one at a trade show where it was like, how do you weigh your worth? And so people were writing their answers on scales. Oh my goodness. So good. And, Coca-Cola has hilarious ones from back in the day. And watching people's surprise or confusion, and they captured it, and it was so playful and fun and on point. But a one-day thing where they decided to embrace the risk and just be human and in it and then all of a sudden they were able to expand that for a year, 2 years. I mean, GE's done some amazing ones with their scholarship opportunities.
Right.
Like, how can you unring a bell? Guys, if you've never seen this campaign, go watch that one. Oh my gosh, it's an oldie but a goodie, but holy cow. So yes, I mean, I'm loving what you're saying, and I'm like, and record it. So don't be scared of the risk, but kind of go, okay, maybe the unknowns might be a bigger value add or an even bigger splash than we could have predicted.
For sure. And, when you talk about risk, and that leads us also to ROI, when we're dealing with digital campaigns, in which everyone deals with digital campaigns, that's one of the first questions is, well, what is my ROI going to be? Hey, I know what my pay-per-click is. What is the ROI on this? Especially in B2B. You mentioned a lot of incredible campaigns, and I think sometimes we think about experiential from a B2C standpoint.
Completely.
But in B2B, experiential can be such a strong tool, especially if you are in a high investment, low volume industry.
Yes.
Okay. Because if you're looking for 5 clients a year, and we know so many people that are, and many of you are in that situation, I want you to think about this. The investment in a really well thought out experiential moment, the yield on that can be so much higher than 50 PPC campaigns. And that's not to say that the digital isn't important, because it's critical.
Yeah.
And we'll tell every one of our clients that, and we'll keep saying it until the cows come home. But that single moment can have such a big lasting impact. The willingness to kind of take that leap and think big, think outside the box, and also bring in the minds that can help you think outside that box. It's a key component.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to chase the squirrel for a second, then we'll come back. But you do a really amazing job helping our team think through applying these principles in these micro moments inside a client experience. Like, okay, how can we transform the onboarding call? Like, what have we learned from things that have gone wrong and things that have gone right? And what are we trying to elicit? And, and then looking at all of those predictable moments, because you can bring big splash to tiny things as long as you have the proper intentionality and the planning that you're outlining. And I think for me, it's so much of a philosophy that I want people to start embracing, instead of just leaving all of this amazing human value on the table. It's like, all right, take your marketing and your client experience you have to do anyways, and get in it and make it something really special if you've got to do it anyways.
There's no question that that's true. I used to say this to my kids all the time, and I'll preach it to everybody out there. Little things become big things. Okay. And that goes for everything you're doing, whether it's your day-to-day operations. I know we're talking about experiential marketing, but I'm going to get on a soapbox for a second. everything you do every single day within your organization makes a difference. And in terms of putting on an event like this, you're right.
Yeah.
It's the Disney line. It's don't just think about the final end impact, but really break it down into the minutia, really break it down into all of the little moments that your audience can interact with you, with your culture, with your philosophy, and with your product.
Yes.
Right? But they can see the product anywhere.
Yes.
They get to interact with all of the things. When I think about as we talk with our clients, so many of them are so proud of who they are, what they're about, what they stand for. And then when we get into their actual marketing, sometimes it's like pulling teeth to try to get that to come through.
Yep.
But there's so many, especially in the B2B world, that can be such a difference maker.
I know.
In terms of engagement, both short and long term.
Yeah, exactly. And, I have seen like things where people have used really smart use of 3D printing, right? So that all of a sudden they turn a sales conversation into something very different and tangible. I have seen smart questions that were meant to create specific emotions in the client to prep them and want to engage deeper, which was so it wasn't a product conversation. And it's exactly on point with what you're saying. And like those small things become big things. So I absolutely love it. So what advice would you give to people if they're like, okay, I want to try to bring this into my marketing, or I want to try to bring this into my team? Like, where would you help, where would you guide people to start?
So a critical thing to keep in mind is that you are putting on a show.
Yes.
You're putting on a show.
Be the show.
You do. You have to be the show, right? Or someone does. And sometimes what keeps people from wanting to jump into stuff like this is out of their comfort zone. And that is okay. It's okay to own that this is not something that's comfortable to me, but there's plenty of people for whom it is second nature. And so don't be afraid to hand that over just a little bit. Yeah. We know your product is your baby.
Yeah.
But it's good.
Yeah.
Right? It's a good baby.
Yeah.
All right. It goes to sleep on time. It doesn't cry at night. This is a good baby. And so it's okay to say, this thing is good. Let's bring in someone that's really comfortable with this, that can help this thing shine. And then from there, we've talked about being comfortable, with the experimentation. But the other thing I would say is start getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. Growth, you and I have talked about this so many times, is that growth hurts.
Yeah.
Growth is a painful process. And so don't shy away from that. If the process is uncomfortable, it probably means something good is happening.
Exactly.
You're experiencing something new. We talked about being the show. There is a big element to experiential marketing of it is a one-shot type deal. Mm-hmm. And so from that standpoint, make sure your plan is rock solid. And there's a lot of testing that can happen there.
Yes, thank you for that.
In a performance world, there's a reason that we do dress rehearsals.
Exactly.
Exactly. There's a reason that we walk through and go, is the setup correct? Is the lighting right? The sound? We run the entire thing 2, 3, 4 times because stuff is going to happen.
Yes.
I said this in a meeting this morning. Murphy's Law shows up when you least need it to, and it is always on time. I promise you.
And always when you did not plan.
And it's never late. It's always right when you need it. But there really is nothing you can't outplan.
Yeah.
And so as you go into your event, make sure you have set aside the time beforehand so that the execution, the day of, the week of, whatever it is spot on.
Yes.
And to that end, don't rush into it.
Yeah.
Time is your currency.
Yeah.
So, it's great to have these wonderful ideas of a trade show booth you want to do. If you can't nail it, wait to the next trade show.
Agreed.
Don't roll out an experience that's halfway done.
Exactly. Oh, I love it. You guys, I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did, because right now what I want you to realize is no matter how much time and effort you've put into your B2B brand, you might be leaving it as two-dimensional, but it's real human beings, real hearts, real brains that are perceiving you and positioning you in the market, get it into the real world so that people can really have and experience what you actually stand for, what you actually fight for and fight against, and just give them an extra reason that you are top of mind, you are the one to be, and you're the one that they're excited to do business with. So thank you guys so much. Would love to hear your questions and comments on this. If you have experiences, especially if you're a B2B company, we would love to see those and share them. So definitely drop them in the comments, and definitely, did I say definitely? Definitely subscribe, because we drop these every single week, and we can't wait to see you next week. Onward and upward.